Hello, and welcome to the Chain Mountain Podcast. I'm your host, Hank Ackerman, and in this week's episode, we sit down with Tom Boney, the COO of Americas for IAC Group. IAC is a global supplier of automotive interior components and systems, including instrument panels, consoles, door panels, and headliners for major OEMs. In full transparency, Tom was not a direct boss of mine, but I worked closely with him on a massive program at Novelis that supported the F-150's conversion from steel to aluminum. This program reduced the vehicle weight of a F-150 by 700 pounds and more than 3 miles per gallon. If you extrapolate the math, conservatively speaking, this program has saved over 6 billion gallons of gas over the past decade. The undertaking was enormous, and we were only one spoke in the wheel, but his leadership during that period makes me consider him, to this day, one of the top 3 leaders I have ever worked for. In this episode, we discuss the challenges and strategies in private equity, focusing on talent retention and improving EBITDA performance. He also highlights the importance of operational excellence and shares his insights on the future of manufacturing, global trade, and the pressing issue of cybersecurity in business. Enjoy this episode. Tom is a wonderful COO, and I hope you learn a lot of lessons. Hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, Tom, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to start off our conversation with a statistic. One that kind of you got me to do some research on, right? In its regard to private equity and turnarounds, right? One of the interesting statistics that I've seen out there is about how many portfolio companies have trouble retaining management talent, right? And overall, the management talent has I'll call it decreased over the last, call it 20, 15 years, especially in the operational realm. You're coming into this conversation after, I think, a very good 3-ish year run, really in a pseudo turnaround situation, right? But you were tasked with really improving the profitability and the ongoing concern of IAC, which you have done a tremendous job of doing. And I don't think anybody had any doubts that you would do that. But getting into it, right? How do you feel about that statement? Do you feel like that's an accurate statistic? What's your observation?
Yeah, thanks, Hank. It's great to be here with you today and talk about some of these things. It's a wonderful place to get started in any business. You start talking about people and talent and the war for talent that
Yeah.
absolutely exists out there everywhere. And so, it is true. It's true in private equity. In fact, I think it's true in public companies, and I think it's true in almost any kind of finance company that, this war for talent is difficult. And, when I look at this situation, I don't know if I consider private equity to be a significant outlier, an outlier for sure. The time horizons of private equity
Mm-hmm.
owned backed businesses is shorter. It seems like things move quicker,
Yeah.
decisions are made faster, and that's one of the advantages.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the collateral damages is with regard to operational or leadership talent as well. My experience has been that you can influence that with the same kind of thoughtful and careful approach that you have with your employees and the team that you surround around you. And so it can be managed, but this is a fast-moving space. And that's one of the advantages that I think being with a private equity-backed business allows you.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, there's not only I think is this a continuing to grow from a number of companies at least. Obviously, it has the vast number of companies under management now within the U.S. But it's got, I think, 2.5 trillion or so in dry powder, right? So we expect a lot of continued acquisition and activity over the next few years. I think there's a lot of funds that are kind of coming to the end of the life, and so the some of the statistics that I've seen is that there's going to be a pretty big 26, 27 out there as a lot of these funds mature, and then obviously other moves are made to buy and acquire with the dry powder that's out there. One of the things that's I think it is interesting that you brought up in that war for talent, right, is to note that some of the EBITDA performance of these firms has lagged public markets over the last few years, right? Now, this may be an influence of the big seven AI firms, but I think there's some other underlying components, and I just wanted to get your take on kind of how you feel like some of these firms got away from maybe making the EBITDA that they should, or what advice you would give some of these firms as they look to improve their EBITDA returns.
Yeah, it's again another really insightful question. If I think about what I've experienced and observed, you and I, we've talked about private equity being a part of the financial fabric for some time. And I think the first movers into private equity did a wonderful job with regard to financial engineering. And I
Yeah,
mean
yeah.
that completely above books. I'm not saying anything in violation to SEC or other requirements. They're just very
Mm-hmm.
fast, heavy lifters, a lot of data management, and did a very good job. And you can make a lot of progress in that space. And maybe a little bit more advanced than some of the public companies, but people
Yeah,
catch up pretty quick. I mean,
yeah,
it's competition, and so people will see that, and so other companies and other entities will do the same thing. So now you're competing in a different space. What I've found to be most rewarding is the combination of the situation I'm in with truly exceptional um, talent on the financial side, deep relationships in banks and other institutions to help you work through different ideas, a very rapid decision-making process, top to bottom
yeah,
is much smoother, much more streamlined. But what I really bring is that operational talent, and then I think this is what has allowed us to maybe catch up and be a big part of this town. Is you combine the things. It's not an or. It's not the tyranny of or. It's the synergies of the and so we've got great financial engineering, and now we're driving some really strong operational performance and discipline, and it shows. I mean, we got the businesses out there are generally, a lot of businesses are good businesses with good backbone. They need operational leadership. And if you can do those two things together at the same time, I think it makes a difference. I don't know about the rest of the industry, but I will tell you that there are not a lot of operators like me available or interested in doing this. That's why this evolution of this title, operating partner,
mm,
someone who is an experienced operator who can bridge the gap between the board or the private equity
mm-hmm.
and the operations and be able to make those things work together seamlessly. I'm not an operating partner. I stepped into an operating role, and that enables me to not be just a consultant or an advisor, but to make the fundamental shifts and changes that you need to make. And I think that's one of the backbones of the success that we've had by bringing those two together and
Yeah,
getting your hands dirty.
yeah.
Going to the shop floor, being with the people on the shop floor, being on off shifts, solving problems with the crisis management, be for side by side, not just an advisor or somebody from the outside.
Yeah, another statistic I'll throw out there is that I think 30 employee attrition in manufacturing rose to 34% in 2024, right, which is the highest level in 2 decades. So that makes that component a top of a boardroom agenda, right? In your experience, how are you able to retain your employees? I mean, obviously, one of the challenges that companies are having is just rising salary inflation, right? Just to meet COLA, for instance. How are you kind of thinking about that, and what are you doing to retain that good talent?
Yeah, Hank, this is really a success story, and it's one that I've really enjoyed. I'm going to just talk about our North America operations. We have operations throughout Mexico and the United States. Had one location in Mexico, I mean, in Canada. We had to actually, we've gone through a downsizing. We had a footprint that was inefficient, and we had to close three plants, three locations. So a lot of employees were impacted. All that scenario would lead you to that you would have a high level of unplanned attrition
Mm-hmm.
in the market in your business.
Right.
In 2022, before I got here, the attrition rate was pretty high. We're right now running at 0.4%
Wow.
of attrition, and that's in our salary ranks. In our hourly ranks, we're
Mm-hmm.
at 4%. And and it's demonstratively different than what our competition is doing, and it's different than it was a couple of years ago. And it's part of the turnaround or the business strategy that I learned going back to my early days in leaning into the people. And in fact, I asked this question to my HR leaders about a month and a half ago. And last week in Monterey, I spent several hours listening to our HR leaders about what's our secret sauce. There's multiple components of it. It comes from a variety of different angles, but the reality is, it's really honest to God, treating people with dignity and respect, and starting at that level. And we start at the most basic level. We believe everyone should come to work safely and go home from work safely. It
Yeah,
seems to be a
yeah.
trivial thing that every leader in my position says, but we're walking the talk. We're changing things. We're shutting down production when we're in an unsafe condition. I mean, we have the ability to do that, and people believe it, and they enjoy working for us. And there's a lot of other things that go to it.
That reminds me of the one of the first times I met you when we were both working at Novellus, and we had a meeting, and there were probably about 20 people in the room, but it was a corporate meeting, right? Just one of those little corporate Novellus conference rooms. And the first thing you did, standing up when we all expected everybody to kind of say, well, so glad you're all here and all this kind of stuff, is you just, first of all, started saying, all right, I just want everybody to be aware of their surroundings, right? And you talked about the exits, you talked about tripping hazards, you talked about all that kind of stuff. And I was like, man, this guy's serious. Like he really means it. And that was a really cool experience. We had some other shared experiences at Novellus, which were pretty interesting, I'll say. You at the time were leading the startup of the Ford F-150 aluminum supply chain, right? And I think that was a pivotal moment. I don't know that younger folks will ever really appreciate the impact of moving all of those steel trucks to aluminum and what that's going to have on our future and how important of a step it is in our manufacturing to really get to that point. But that was a huge move, Ford F-150 being the most popular vehicle out there. So you had a couple of kind of, I'll put it, great management techniques, right? You spent a lot of one-on-one time with people. I remember some of our one-on-ones, and you spent a lot of time really leaning in and problem solving. I wanted just to understand a little bit about kind of what your takeaway from those experience was, and what you felt like you learned from that Ford F-150 launch.
Yeah, Hank, it was, you're very kind. Some of those one-on-one conversations were at 11:30 or 1 a.m. And
Sundays, I remember. Yeah.
and Sundays as well, and on holidays, and scratching our head is how did we get here and what do
Yeah.
we need to do differently?
Yeah.
It was a great deal of fun, and we had enormous success. I always tell everyone we stayed off the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And so for that, congratulations on you and the rest of the team who were part of that. I think there's a couple of things I'd like to share. First of all, you know, I don't want to call it a value statement or a principle-based statement, but I had a very common framework in all the discussions that we had with regard to any significant supply chain launch, which is number one, you just absolutely have to take care of your people. There's nothing that you should put at risk with your people. I mean, safety-wise, protocol-wise, dignity and respect. And when I talk about safety, I talk about physical safety. I also talk about mental safety.
Yeah.
People should not feel that every time they walk into a meeting that the world is on their shoulders. They don't think the best that way. You got to give people support, and that's what those one-on-one conversations are. That's where you talk about things like football games or what's going on with the family and things like that. You start with that. The second thing, and I think this is where people get really sideways on launches or on significant supply chain issues. Oftentimes you hear people talk about the costs that are being incurred and the issues that are being faced and the people you have to add. You and I and our team were absolutely committed to take care of the Ford Motor Company. Take care of your customer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Take care of your customer. If we needed to get a coil from one place to another, we were going to figure out how to get it done. We remember we had the
Yeah.
coil whisperer who would
Yeah.
help us find those coils on
Hmm.
occasion when systems weren't up and operating. But we would always take care of the customer. And I can't tell you how important that is And then, so when then, and you and I worked through this, and you could get there pretty quickly. And we got there Ford, we got there pretty quickly in IAC. Take care of your people, take care of your customer, then you have permission to make more money. Oftentimes, people
Right.
think about making more money too early in the process, and they don't pay attention to what's going on with their people, and they don't pay attention to what's going on with the customer. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying just everything that kind of the customer wants something, we want this in a yellow ribbon. No, we get paid a fair price for what should be on a Kanban card, right? And
Right.
all the information that goes with that. That's what we need to deliver time and time again. And that's what we did really, really well. And we moved through that launch and made some huge decisions to make sure that we would take care of those things, but it enabled us to get some stability and fundamentally get to making more money. The
Yeah.
other thing, just one more thing on this, Hank, is that
No, keep going, please.
I really the use of data, artificial intelligence and the amount of data that people can manage is really fascinating to me. I'm dealing with it. I'm trying to understand it. We could talk a little bit more about that. But at the core, are you committed to making decisions based on data?
Yeah.
Or are you committed to making decisions based on gut feel? And if you remember some of the startup things, people were telling us we were running better,
Right.
but the data wasn't saying that. And
Yeah.
so we would talk honestly about the data, look at the problems, and when we found gaps, celebrate the reds.
Yeah.
Just not look for everything to be greenwashed. If it's red, it's okay. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. We really appreciate
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Now we can see it. Now let's do something about it.
Yeah.
And when you get people that have the confidence that they can bring out those kind of issues in a complex supply chain, I think you make incredible strides in a very, very fast basis.
Yeah, I remember one of the things you kind of commenting on in a room full of folks is, we need to know about the problems early, right? You Then I could do something about them.
Right.
But if we bury a problem and we think it's going to go away, and then all of the last moment we all of a sudden have to deal with the consequences of it, it's pretty painful, right? So I love that story. I think about it all the time, and it definitely iterates, and still within a lot of my career now, where we're working with clients to kind of see out in their horizon a little bit. That's basically the concept, right? How can I understand the potential problems coming at me? How can I model the scenario out to understand what the impacts are, what mitigating activities I'm going to take, right? And then I'm in a position to succeed instead of reacting all the time to all those challenges. The other thing I recall us, kind of going through was obviously one of the things that in my mind differentiated you, excuse me, as a manager against many other managers that I've had is kind of your ability to both understand and communicate at the analyst, manager, shop floor level, but then also communicate at the C-suite level. In your mind's eye, is there a differentiation between how you kind of communicate at the different levels? And a lot of people, in our environment, I'm trying to, be able to have a platform to be able to get younger folks to say, hey, this is a great industry and I love being in it and I want to grow up and I want to be just like Tom. I want to be a COO, right? What kind of advice would you give on your communication style as you move into the C-suite? Because a lot of people just don't have that access. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I graduated from St. Bonaventure University. I'm still active with the school. I was just there last week. I sat down with the school, and I was with the dean of the business school and a bunch of really sharp, bright students.
Yeah.
And they asked me, what is it that you would have done a better job of at St. Bonaventure to prepare you for your career? There's a link to this, Hank. I'll get to the
Yeah.
point of
Yeah.
your
No,
question.
I get it.
State Bonaventure has a really good business school.
Yeah.
Is it Wharton? No, it's not Wharton, but it's a good business school with professors that care. And I learned a lot about business and
Mm-hmm.
finance and how to use math and things along those lines. I felt very competitive when I came out. Um, Two buildings over is the communications group. The St. Bonaventure is a wonderful communications team. We've got a lot of people that have worked with ESPN, announcers, done a
Mm-hmm.
lot of really cool things. I never walked into that building and took one class. Communications was something that communications majors did. Business majors didn't do that. We did
Right.
business stuff, but sure, we had to do presentations. But there's a science and art in every one of my executive surveys. ever since I've been running businesses, which is now close to 20 years, the number one thing is always said you can do a better job on is communications. And
Right.
and for a lot of time, I took that very, very seriously about the importance to be able to communicate one-on-one, small groups, shop floor, mid-level floor, and work on that and continuously look for feedback mechanisms about how am I doing? What am I going? One of the great things is I went through videotape
Oh
presentations
yeah.
about
Yeah.
videotaping how I communicate. And people
Yeah.
think that, that seems abnormal or not right, right? And I don't know if it's a common experience, but you work on it and you think about it and you have somebody, you go into the C-suite the first time, you don't know how to walk into a C-suite the first time you do it. Nobody does.
Right.
You're not the first fish out of water, but get a friend, an associate, someone who's look out for. How did I do? Did I sit right? Did I listen right? Did I engage right? I'm not talking about the politics of it. But how do you make a point? When do you speak? When do you have the opportunity to influence? What's your agenda going into it? This is not manipulation, but this is really very carefully listening to what's going on, paying attention, and then putting yourself in the moment. And so
Yeah.
that's all to lead to the following. Look, communications is essential. This is a form of communication over a video, digital kind of communication.
Right.
You learn communications by being present, by being with the people who you're working with. Working from home has its place, but for anybody who is, from my perspective, I give any advice is lean in to being present. Go to the shop floor. You can't see it on a video.
No.
Go to the sales office and talk to the salesman. Go see customers. Talk to the customers. Go see your logistics suppliers. Go see them in their center of excellence. And go to the C-suite and be present for those things. It's a little bit extra work. There's all kinds of outs to get away from that, and I use some of those. I don't think I'll ever travel to India for a 4-hour meeting again. And I've done that in my past. I'll do that via Zoom, but I will travel to places like India and all parts of the world at the right time to be present and to be available and practice the communications.
Right. Right. That's tremendous advice. I heard a hot take on a podcast not too long ago that said, um, now that AI and obviously technology is changing, our younger generation, right, their belief is that the CEOs of the future may not be, financial CEOs or up from sales. They're going to be the ones who can communicate, right? That have that skill and ability because with kids, sitting around on their devices all day, um, communication is changing, right? And if you can be articulate, concise, those are really powerful things for someone, in the future generations. Um, Moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit about your time in St. Bonaventure. You are both a player and you've coached basketball, I believe, since. And so we're just going to go take a slight digression into that because I know
Great.
that's a
Love it.
love of yours, right? Um, but bring it back to, how had that experience shape your leadership style in the business world?
Yeah, look, I played on some great teams. I played on some crappy teams. They were just talking about yesterday about some of the Philadelphia Eagles players, and they're saying, "Did you lose more from winning the Super Bowl or losing the Super Bowl?"
Yeah,
And the answer was losing. And 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 in athletics, you will lose,
yeah,
and you will push yourself mentally and physically to be as best as you possibly can, and you will be very disappointed about what it is, but you got to bounce back. You're playing the game on Thursday night. You lost to Temple. You got to play Penn State Saturday, and
yeah,
you don't have a lot of time to wallow and cry. You say, "Okay, we lost. Look at the tape." You spent about 20 minutes looking at the tape of what happened yesterday, what you can improve, and you're working on what's the next team's, what you need to do next.
right.
And if you got a good coach, the good coach is pointing out your weaknesses. And boy, I'll tell you, a lot of people in business don't like to hear about their weaknesses. But in sports, the number one, the guy who spent the most money in coaching in the history of professional basketball is Michael Jordan.
Yeah,
And the guy who spent the most money in coaching professional football is Tom Brady. Those coaches weren't saying, "Hey, Tom, you're throwing the ball perfectly every time." No,
yeah,
they're finding every detail. And so in sports, if you take that sense that people who would give you critique and information are just trying to make you better, and you get that about you, and then you understand that it's a team, that you can't go out and do this all on your own. Take a couple of those skill sets and those traits, and you realize that the basis of sports and athletics for me was a big basis for how I respond and I show up at work every day.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not saying look, I don't have any pretenses that we only hire ex-athletes, or the only people in my C-suite are ex-athletes. No, we have a lot of diversity, and there's a lot of really good paths and benefits. So someone who went to the military, they learn a different set of skill sets. And what I've
hmm
learned, again, coming back to my sports, is that if we had a whole bunch of guys my same size and my same build, coming from the same community, trying to play basketball, we wouldn't have won many games. We needed a point guard. We needed a shooting guard. We needed someone coming off the bench. We needed someone who was our manager. Everyone has roles and responsibilities, and you got to
yeah.
celebrate those roles and responsibilities.
That's great. That's great. That reminds me of a quote by the former CEO of McDonald's, Jim Skinner, and I was fortunate enough to meet him at an event, and at that event, he said, if everybody around the boardroom looks like you, then you're probably getting bad advice, right? So I think that's a great call out, right? Something to think about. Um, so a little bit more into the kind of the detailed politics of basketball at the moment. So
What a mess.
well, I'll let me start with the college athletes now getting paid, right? What's your take on kind of how that changes the landscape of the sport? Um, does it kill kind of the diversity? I mean, is it going to kill the Cinderella team, right? What do you think that impact's going to ultimately be?
Yeah, so let's start at the broader thing, if I could, because everyone leans into this NIL, name, image, and likeness
hmm
component, and the amount of money that people are getting paid, and the pressures and responsibilities that go with that. You're paying someone $5, 4, $3 million to carry your school's logo on their back, and they go out and have a bad game. Death threats end up happening, right? And
Yeah,
there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. So these kids at 18, 19, 20, 21 year old, boy, they've got a big burden on them. However, as you talk about this, should there be some compensation for athletes in that sport? It's been that way for years. Scholarship is what I reviewed
yeah,
to as my compensation for what I could do when I was playing.
right,
Um, Now that it's advanced a little bit more, and as the money moving to them, there are some significant issues. However, before I get to that issue, the two bigger issues is found in one is the transfer portal. The idea that players that say they're going to a university to be able to stick with the university or represent that university as a scholar athlete, and to be on their fourth school in their fourth year of education, I don't think that that's true to the athlete. I don't think that's good for the school. I don't think that's good for the
right,
institutions. And I think that that's a fundamental problem. And I think that could be corrected in a normal way pretty quickly if the NCAA wanted to go back a couple of years and put some restrictions on how often you could transfer, why you could transfer, a little bit more of a governance process. But I
right,
think that's a big issue, because I think you gotta get these kids to want to stay where they're staying. The other thing is the amount of money and the distribution of that money. You asked about the Cinderella teams. Well, a mid-market school like St. Bonaventure wants to go play against a large market school, and you can pick anyone. Let's call it North Carolina or Michigan.
yep,
Their budget for paying players is 4 or 5 times, maybe 6 times greater than what a St. Bonaventure can afford through the
yep,
collective and through the NIL.
that's right,
Does money assure you a victory? No, it doesn't assure you a victory. But what it does assure you is a player that comes into a school like St. Bonaventure, Loyola, a good school playing good basketball, has a good sophomore year, their ability to go enrich their portfolio in their junior year to a larger school is obvious. And
Right.
so the coaches are all coaching with 1 year teams.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in a 1 year team is hard to watch, to enjoy, to
Yeah.
celebrate for me as an athlete. I like,
Yeah.
the development of bringing someone in who is a young man or woman into their sport, growing, watching them develop, and when they get to their sophomore, junior year, are really starting to deliver and have results. And you'll remember, Hank, this goes back to the one and
Yeah.
dones, right?
Yeah.
I'll do 1 year at Duke, and then I'll go to the NBA. I'll
Yeah.
do 1 year at Kentucky, then I'll go to the NBA. Well, now they're going 1 year at St. Bonaventure, then 1 year at Gonzaga, then 1 year at Duke,
That's
and then
right.
going to the NBA. And it's a problem. And
Yeah.
the NCAA, God bless them, I think they've got a wonderful, wonderful product, in both men's football, men's basketball, but the other Olympic sports on campus, that they celebrate. A great way for students to be engaged, love of the university,
Yeah.
and so they got a great product, but it's a little out of control, and there has to be a lot more governance. The Big Ten has what, 18 teams now?
Yeah.
Why is it the Big Ten?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
how to fix it, but I do believe it will get fixed.
Yeah.
It's the presidents of the universities, the folks around it. There's got to be some sort of solution, and I'm hoping for some really smart people to figure it out.
Yeah, as much as when I was growing up in Detroit and high school, right, we had the Fab Five, and as much as I love watching them play, right, it was great. But that's one of the best situations that you could possibly arrive in, where you had a bunch of young players who came in, and then of course, some of them left early for college, and it just kind of feels like all of a sudden it's a bunch of Kentucky teams, right? Where Calipari
Right.
has 1 year to make it all the way to the big dance. Otherwise, his raw talent's just going to go somewhere else.
Well, think
Um,
about this. I think the University of Indiana in April didn't have a head coach or any players on its roster, and right now they're ranked in the top 20 preseason.
wow, wow, wow. So it goes to, yeah, good, that, and I feel, I'm kind of I went to Davidson, so small school, a little bit like St. Bonaventure. We've had our Cinderella runs, in the tournament. But I feel like we're at a massive disadvantage, right? Simply from a fundraising standpoint, right? Than a lot of the other bigger schools, and that's that makes it. I believe just takes out the diversity of the different teams and the options to be able to grow a bigger play, a space of more talented players, right? So I'm going to pivot a little bit, if I can, to the automotive industry, right? And for the listeners, IAC is one of the top tier one providers into the automotive industry. Before that, Tom was at Novellus, which again is one of the top tier one providers. Obviously, launching the F-150. So I respect a lot of your call it take on automotive, which probably isn't the same as your typical analyst, and that's why I love it. Right. To hit this straight on, so China obviously has surged as the largest auto producer, and now they're the largest exporter, both across gas as well as EV. What does the U.S. need to do to remain competitive in that market, in your mind?
Well, again, my business, my business point of view, is right now being represented through IAC, and I'm watching the unfolding global economic challenges that we have, including this tariff perspective. From my point of view, I would not answer what do we need to do as U.S. I think we need to answer the question, what do we need to do as North America?
Mm, yeah,
If I take a look at what we have in North America between Canada, United States, and Mexico as the three primary players in that space, what does each have? Canada has unbelievable, unbridled natural resources. The amount of renewable energy that can come from their hydro, what they do as far as their capabilities, their woods and forests, the resources that they have. The United States has money, intellect, and creativity, and a place, a real melting pot. We have things like NVIDIA, Apple, businesses just come, these mega businesses, they just come out of the ground and just change the world, but become the standard for the world. And
Yeah.
that's something to leverage. And our political system is we could argue is not as good as we'd all like it to be, but still the best in the world. And then Mexico. Mexico has an unbelievable workforce talent, structural ability to compete, brings a workforce that, in my experience of traveling down to Mexico, is as good as any workforce that I've been around. And so if we combine all those three as NAFTA envisioned it and really owned that from the perspective of what we needed to do, then I think we could win collectively over the long period of time. And what does China bring? Well, China brings some ingenuity, some creativity, a lot of government-backed kind of solutions. However, even though the products that they produce, BYD produces an incredible product, there's nothing wrong with competition. Good, China, bring as best you got. I mean, that's fine. That'll make us
Yeah.
better. It's Boeing, Airbus, Ali and Fraser,
Yeah.
Palmer and Nicholas.
Yeah.
That's what makes us better. And I'll take that competition on, but we've got to go in and fight that battle with clarity on who's on our team. And for right now, for my purposes, um, Mexico's on my team, United States is on my team, Canada's on my team, and we're working aggressively between those three countries in the midst of this tariff changes to be able to set up the best possible product with our customers so we can win on a global scale.
Right. Right. So at the middle, obviously, of that whole EV debate is Tesla, right? Super hot stock with the huge multiple at the moment, right? Which is insanely almost 3x, GM and Ford, right? All that said, it's lost a lot of value recently. If you are the new CEO of Tesla, what would you do?
Well, I love what Elon did today. Bought $1 billion worth of stock. I mean, that's a pretty big big vote of confidence. That's a check that I can't write. I wouldn't do that. So I'd stay away from that strategy. Hey, look, I think Tesla's a fascinating company, and when I look at Tesla, and I've looked at this for a lot of years, what's the value come from? I don't know if the value ever came, and I'm pretty sure the value never came from the vehicle on the road, but it came from what Elon Musk and his leadership team had envisioned. Now, if I look at the combination between his AIX, Twitter, Gronk, SpaceX, all that kind of stuff together, if Tesla is the umbrella and continues to use the technology from SpaceX to move that into the automobile world and use the data that they've collected, billions and billions and billions, trillions of pieces of data about all of us who've been around Teslas and things along those lines, and continues to drive this artificial intelligence, I think the company is going to be much more than just a manufacturing company.
Right.
And I think that becomes important. I would take, from my background, from my perspective, of running businesses and being around businesses, I'm not, nowhere close to what Elon Musk could envision or has envisioned. But you need operational excellence. You need to drive operational excellence at every part of a business like this to optimize the value. What I could bring to the party would be focus on operational excellence. I think you need to have operational excellence, and I think you need to set legitimate targets and KPIs. And I think once you get to those KPIs, you have to even optimize beyond that. And you have to have that relentless, continuous improvement methodology and drive it. And so, if the team at Tesla was interested in a person that was going to drive operational excellence while all this other stuff was going on,
Right.
that's what I would focus on. And I think there's value created in operational excellence. Heck, Nike just came out with
Yeah.
their new CEO talking about their marketing position. And what did they point in their last quarterly earnings? They pointed to the fact that they've got their operational excellence back in line. Their inventories are right. Their ERP system has been adjusted. Their supply chains are more efficient. They're going to still, sponsor Saquon Barkley and NBA teams and NFL teams, but they're driving operational excellence because that funds the big portion of who they are. So that's where I think in, you know, being associated with Tesla where they could probably take advantage of taking some steps forward.
Yeah, yeah. I had the privilege of doing some work, consulting work with them back in the day, and yeah, that was still true then, right? I mean, that was at the launch, I think, of the X, just after the X and the launch of the Model Y. A lot of issues in production, right? A lot of issues with forecasting, a lot of issues with excess inventory, the wrong type of thing, systems fundamentals that I think the North American automotive world really leads in, right? I mean, if I think I look at the GM, Ford, Stellantis chains and think, man, they are just so efficient. They just are an incredible, I would say, aspiration, right, for where manufacturing, needs to go overall across many industries. I don't see many industries that lean and that tight and able to make it to that level. But certainly it's an aspiration. Um, Tom, last question. If you're
Our
looking
time's up
ahead,
already. This has been
I
enjoyable.
know, I know it blows through, doesn't it? Um,
Yeah.
so looking ahead next 10 years, right? What excites you the most? What worries you the most about the intersection of manufacturing, technology, and global trade, right?
Yeah. What's really fun to me is the fact that, this is evolving, it is shifting, and, and businesses are adapting and adopting, you know, and making all that part of it. And I look forward to, I wouldn't call it uncertainty, but I look forward to, the next set of operational or business challenges um, that result from, you know, what I consider to be good competition. What I worry about is two things. One is I worry about the geopolitical risks that continues to unfold in front of our very eyes. I'm very concerned about and pray for what's happening in Ukraine. The impact it has on Russia, what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Asia, Southeast Asia. There's a lot of uncertainty across the board, and geopolitical risk is real,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems to be increasing at a very fast rate. And I worry about that. You and I, similar age, we've had the good fortune of having mostly peaceful adult
Yeah,
lives, right?
that's right.
And I'd like to see it, but I'm not so sure that with all that's going on that's going to be the occurrence. So anything we can do to lean into that, I think, is really important. The other thing is, Hank, you and I have talked about this a little bit, but I hope people find excitement and enthusiasm about making stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
just getting up in the
yeah,
morning and, what are you going to do today? I'm going to make something. And I'm not talking about just from a C-suite level. I'm talking about people that are on the shop floor and are helping us make things and do the right things. And I wonder about that, about people's appetite and interest to go to school, to learn how to do that, to be an industrial electrical engineer, to get a job. There's Tim Cook was just in Kentucky at the glass factory talking
yeah.
to third generation manufacturing people and
Mm-hmm.
how excited they were about what they were doing because they were making a difference. They were making the best glass for the best technology company they thought in the world. There's a lot of pride that goes into that, but you got to have people want to do it. It's got to be
Right.
encouraged. Got to be encouraged at every level. And we've lost our way in much of the United States and many of the Western parts of the world about typical trade things, welders, pipe fitters, people who want to walk the shop floor and do that. And there's a good life in that. And I just want to make sure that people feel that that's a positive life for them to go for it. If we don't
Yeah.
do that, then we will lose. If we can't get the human talent to be excited about their jobs and their roles, we will lose the game because you can't do anything without good people.
Yeah, I had a really interesting guest in my prior recording here who we talked a lot about mechatronics, right? Which is kind of, obviously as production matures and gains in sophistication, we've got more robotics. Robotics is still requires mechanical components as well as electrical components. And there's a crossbreeding of kind of engineering that's required now, right? You've got biology, electronics, physics now, and mechanics that are all required in order to really be able to, kind of understand a problem and be able to keep the modern factory going, right? And I think that still goes back to the STEM problem, which you're mentioning, right? Do we have the right STEM careers? And do we have the STEM careers at the right levels, right? So do you have to be amazing at STEM in order to, have a job on the shop floor in 15 years, right? No, not necessarily, right? But it's a fundamental stepping stone to being able to position yourself correctly. That does. You also had what concerns you a little bit. One of the things I'd love to get your take on is kind of cyber in general, and I'm not sure. You're not a CIO, right? So I understand. I'm not going to put you past your level of expertise. But it used to be that NATO had a premise, right, which was if you attack one of us, you attack all of us, right? And that was the concept. What's a cyber attack, right? Is that when does that become an act of war, and how in your mind's eye, right? How do we retain the value of American businesses and what we do and our IP, while we're still having to deal with this kind of unbridled cyber warfare?
Yeah, this is relevant. Last week Jaguar Land Rover was down for the whole week because of a cyber attack.
Wow.
And that was 8 days of production that occurred. And Jaguar Land Rover is a formidable company, somebody who should be proud to celebrate with regard to it. And their defenses, well, I'm not inside of their business. The defenses and support was probably pretty strong, being in the automotive space. But yet they're vulnerable, and their vulnerability touches all the tier suppliers, all the people upstream and downstream associated with that. And you got to ask yourself that same question. Now, I don't know who it is, but oftentimes these are not government funded or government backed entities that are doing this.
Right.
This is terrorism. This is extortion. This is it's a high form of crime that has meaningful impacts.
Mm-hmm.
But it could be a government or a state run agency.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
sure, we've heard enough about that. But more than likely, from what I've seen, it's a bunch of people working in the dark at night through a pretty sophisticated network, and they're not a singular entity. And how do you fight something that you really can't see? And I think they know that, and we know that. So it's a battle that's going to continue to just build upon itself. Where this goes, Hank, I don't know, but the dependency and the security of this, it's in every board meeting that I'm in, the risk associated with your cybersecurity and what are you doing to protect your entity from outside attacks. And and really, what I've unfortunately have learned is you can't protect yourself from outside attacks. The only thing you do is detect it very, very quickly and try
Right.
to get it
Right.
controlled. And that's a whole different battle game about than cyber protection. You got to do that, but cyber diagnostics and making sure that you can get at it and control that real well, and set up walls. And there's people out there trying to beat it. I don't
Yeah.
know. That's about all I can say. Other than that, go to a cocktail party and say it's a big issue. But I'm glad we got a really good CIO here at IAC, and he's worried about it quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, Tom, thank you so much for being on. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed the conversation as always. And again, actually, one last comment. I wanted to give you a moment. I know that you're kind of passionate. You have a couple of nonprofits that you support. I wanted to give you a moment, and the listeners the opportunity if they've got some spare cash, to point it their way. What's your nonprofit? What are you passionate about helping?
Yeah, I've been involved with Habitat for Humanity for quite some time, and I think it's a wonderful organization. And I celebrate Habitat for Humanity by volunteering time, money, and energy to be able to do that. But what I've learned is something that's happening really pretty cool here in Atlanta. I've been on the board of the West Side Future Fund. And the West Side Future Fund is on the west side of Atlanta, just adjacent to Georgia Tech's campus, north of where the Atlanta Falcons play, and south of where the Atlanta Braves play, and the home of Martin Luther King. And that community, I've been building habitat houses in that community around for quite some while, and it was pretty easy to see that the house that we built couldn't survive the environment. And so, what do you do about the environment? Well, Arthur Blank, when they put in his foundation, when they put in the new Mercedes Stadium, made a commitment to redeveloping the West Side. And the idea is to move from a food desert to bringing food and services into that community, having the police community be in that area to attract the people that used to be there generations to come back
Right.
to that area and
Right.
resettle. To not only do the real estate, but the streets are safe. You can walk and
Yeah.
go get a loaf of bread. It's not the corner drug. And the impact to watch this West Side Future Fund. In fact, Thursday night, I'm going to be celebrating with a bunch of other people and other board members the 10-year anniversary of the West
Oh,
Side
that's
Future Fund.
great.
And, just about where we've been, where we're going, the people and what they're trying to do, and what we can celebrate as far as what you see down in that really Martin Luther King's home, right?
Right. Right.
I don't know if anything sort of screams about the development of the South than thinking about Martin Luther King and the impact that he had and what that means to our lives today. And to think his house is in the middle of a place that's a rundown community, and we're going to build that back up as a good model. So West Side Future Fun, it's out there on the web, but I really enjoy it, and it's been something I've been very proud to be associated with.
Yeah, I think I lived in Atlanta for 20 years, and I was there during a period of enormous growth, right? But also a period of enormous gentrification, which is not necessarily how I think the city needed to grow up. A lot of displacement, right? Unnecessarily. However, I think this is such a great charity, and as much as just the fundamentals of, hey, let's have a home for person, right, where that secures their legacy, helps them raise their family. That's such an important part of what it is to be an American at the end of the day. I think that you also tackle a whole bunch of other challenges which are really important, right? And you mentioned food desert right off the bat, right? I think food, as abundant as it is right now, it's crazy for a lot of Americans to think, oh, well, we have look at the grocery stores, they're full of stuff, right? But to make it accessible and to also have healthy food options is really important, right? I mean, 70% of Americans are obese, and I think there's a big challenge ahead to be able to provide healthy food options, to the neediest communities. So really applaud all the work that you guys are doing there, and congratulations on your 10-year anniversary.
Yeah, it's exciting. It'll be fun to be with them on Thursday and kick off the next 10 years. So
Awesome.
the guys that running it, John Allman's just doing just a fabulous job of thinking about what we can do is in the future. So
That's
glad to support him in whatever way I can. It's
tremendous,
great.
tremendous. Well, thanks again, Tom. Appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll have you back on soon.
Hank, best of luck to you. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of your podcast I listened to last. I think you're on to something here, and hopefully, one or two people will listen to this and get something out of it. So
I
that'll be
hope so
great.
too. I'm sure they will.
All right.
Thanks, Tom. Bye.
Thanks.